Good evening, and welcome to episode 3 of Muffin Reads the Classics. I am wearing this on my head for a reason, I assure you. This is actually take 4, maybe 5, because I've been having some difficulty getting my birds to come down. Swiveled myself around a little bit today so you can see more of the lovely Christmas tree, because we are here with stave 3, the second of the 3 spirits, and personally my favourite part of the book. Lentil, lentil. Now's not a good time, mate. No, calm down. Never worked with children or animals, and I've got a lot of animals in here. The only one that's being really, really good is my giant African land snail, Bartolin Glanderson. Bartolin is being very good and very quiet. Now here we are, we're back at the end of the last chapter. Scrooge threw an absolute fit because he was so upset by everything that he'd seen with the ghost of Christmas past that he took a great big candle snuffer type thing and shoved it over the top of the ghost of Christmas past to extinguish his light, and then fell asleep again. He's having quite a time of it, but frankly he does deserve it. And here we are with stave 3, the second of the 3 spirits. Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told what the bell was again upon the strike of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time, for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that, he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of the curtains this new spectre would draw back, and he put every one of them aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp look about all around the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of his appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Scrooge thought he was quite capable of dealing with any number of things. I don't mind telling you that he was ready for a good broad field of strange experiences, having what he had already seen, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros could have astonished him very much. But being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and consequently when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, and yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and centre of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being the only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the first consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have done at first, for it is always the person who is not in the predicament who knows what they ought to have done in it, and would unquestionably have done so too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. The idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment that Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called to him by his name, and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrifaction of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped up upon the floor, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12-cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch sat a woman who'd forgotten her, lost her thing. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. "Come in!" exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly, and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and although its eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas Present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple deep green robe, or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of its garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanour, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the like of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years?" pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas Present rose. "Spirit," Scrooge said submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson from which is working now. To-night, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did so, as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night. And they stood in the city streets upon Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings, and from the tops of their houses, where it was mad delight to see it coming plumping down into the road below, and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been sheet of snow upon the roofs, which last deposit had been ploughed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and waggons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where great streets branched off and made intricate channels hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire, and were blazing away to their heart's content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate of the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavoured to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shovelling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball. Better-natured missile by far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great, round, pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the streets in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in their fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from the shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and the pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves there. There were Norfolk biffins, squab and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating. Sorry, something just weirdly happened on my phone there. Urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, oh, the grocers, nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1. But through those gaps such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or that even the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness from their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress, but that the customers all so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promise of the day that they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases on the counter and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the such-like little mistakes in the best humour possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts on which they fastened their aprons behind Mitch might their aprons behind might have been their own, worn outside for general inspection and for Christmas doors to peck at if they chose. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. That's my gayest face, did you like it? And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people, carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revellers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge behind him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as the bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dimmers from his torch. Dinners. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once and twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled with each other, he shed a few drops of water on it from them, and their good humour was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was, God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased and the bakers were shut up, and there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking. in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if the stones were cooking too. "Is there a particular flavour that you sprinkle from your torch?" asked Scrooge. "There is, my own." "Would you apply it to any kind of dinner on this day?" "To any kindly given. To a poor one most." "Why to a poor one most?" asked Scrooge. "Because it needs it most." "Spirit," said Scrooge, after a moment's thought, "I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunity of innocent enjoyment." "I?" cried the Spirit. "You would deprive men of their means of dining every 7th day. Often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all," said Scrooge, "wouldn't you?" "I?" cried the Spirit. "You seek to close these places on the 7th day," said Scrooge, "and it comes to the same thing." "I seek," said the Spirit. "Forgive me if I'm wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least that of your family," said Scrooge. "There are some upon this earth of yours," returned the Spirit, "who lay claim to know me, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are strange to us and all our kith and kin, if ever they had lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us." Scrooge promised that he would, and went on, invisible, as they had before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as if it were possible to have done in any lofty hall. Stop for a second, because I really like that little bit where Scrooge is like, well, the church is making out that people should stop, serving and doing business on a Sunday. And of course, the bakers are the only people with big ovens for poor people, so they're the only place that they can bake food. They can bake their food because they didn't have ovens in all the houses back then. And so it was after the bakers had finished making their bread, people would be able to they would pay a little bit to use the baker's oven to cook their meat. But what he's saying is that people do the most horrible things in this world, and they are full of hate, some of them, and they'll say things like, oh, refugees are taking away, things for disabled people, and these people are doing terrible things to women, and this and that and the other thing, and all these people are doing terrible things. I'm sorry, but the terrible things that are being done are the things of hatred. And if you are one of the ones that are saying that, refugees are taking away from disabled people like me, no, they're not. No, they're not. It's people like you who would rather blame another downtrodden person than look to who is really at blame. And also, when it comes to using religion or the government or any of these other things as a scapegoat for your own ill deeds and your own nastiness, then it's not true, and it's cowardly. If people are hateful, then they are hateful. It is not for God, it is not for any gods, it is not for the government it's not for the country, it's not for the good of disabled people, it's because you're a dickhead. So if you're one of those people who claims to want to care, who claims that they hate a bunch of other people because they're doing something bad for another bunch of people, you're actually just as bad. And you're probably also one of the people that once said that I was selfish, and how dare I, say that it's not right that people park their work lorries in disabled spaces and things like that. I have had the same arguments put against me as a disabled person by the same people who then claim that they hate refugees because they're taking away from disabled people. If you're hateful, you're hateful. Don't blame it on anybody but yourself. Hardship doesn't make people hateful. I have gone through a great deal of hardship in my life. A great deal. And I am anything but hateful. So that's my little message for you. I'm going to interject. Hate is as hate does. Love is as love does. So there. And perhaps it was the pleasure of the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men, that led him straight to the Scrooge's clerk, for there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe, and on to the threshold of the door. The spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with a sprinkling from his torch. Think of that! Bob had but 15 bob a week himself, and pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name. And yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed this four-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt-collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son and heir in the honour of the day, into his mouth, and rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table, and exalted Master Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "Why, wherever has got your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit, "and your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour." "Oh, here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Martha, mother," cried the 2 young Cratchits. "Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha." "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times, and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her officious seal. "We'd a deal of work to finish up last night," replied the girl, "and to clear away this morning, mother." "Well, never mind, so long as you are come," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless ye." "No, no, there's father coming," cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "Hide, Martha, hide!" So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 foot of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming?" said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from church, and had come home rampant. "Not coming upon Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, when she had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob hugged his daughter to his heart's content. "Oh, as good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you had ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture into a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer, Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon, to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth it was very much something like that in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs up for everyone, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guards upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths. Yes, they should screech for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by such a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight rose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe that there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of bone upon the dish, that they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alive, alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough? Suppose it should break in turning out? Suppose someone should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose? A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hallo! A great deal of steam. The pudding came out of the copper, a smell like a washing day. That was the cloth, a smell like an eating house, and a pastry's cook next door to each other, with a laundress's door next to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with the Christmas holly stuck into the top. "Oh, a wonderful pudding," Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, and that he regarded as it was the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she could confess she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought at all that it was a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so, and any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done, and the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovel full of chestnuts on the fire. Then all Cratchit family drew together around the hearth, in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as they were golden goblets, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while a Merry Christmas to us all, my dears, God bless us, which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side, upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest that he had never felt before. Tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "Oh, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, kind spirit, say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here." "What then?" "If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men will live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear an insect on the leaf pronouncing on too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling his eyes upon the ground, he raised them speedily on hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob. "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children, Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I am sure," said she, "on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first in their proceedings in which had no heartiness in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, from the mere relief of Scrooge the baleful being done with. Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Master Peter, which could bring in, if obtained, full 5 and 6pence weekly. The 2 young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter's being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire from between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investments he would favour when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at a milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do, and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home, and how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord wasn't much about as tall as Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collars so high that you couldn't have seen his head if you had been there. All this time the chestnut and the drug went round, and by they had a song about a lost child travelling in the snow, from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, and sang very well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time, and when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim. By this time it was getting dark, and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlours, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cosy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. There all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and to be the first to greet them. Here again were shadows on the window blinds of guests assembling, and there a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbour's house, where, woe upon the single man who saw them enter, artful witches, well they knew it, all in a glow. But you had judged from the numbers of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they got there, instead of every house expecting company, and piling up its fires, half chimney high. Blessings upon it, how the ghost exulted, how it baited its breadth of breast, and opened its capacious palm, and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, dotting the dusky street with specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening somewhere, laughed out loudly as the spirit passed, though little he kenned the lamplighter that he had any company but Christmas. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stones were cast about, and though it were the burial place of giants, and water spread itself wherever so it listed, or would have done so but for the frost that held it prisoner, and nothing grew but moss and furze and coarse, rank grass. Down in the west the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red which gazed upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of darkest night. "What place is this?" asked Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labour in the bowels of the earth," returned the spirit. "But they know me. See!" A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire, an old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind on the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song, and it had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so surely as they stopped, his vigour sank again. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped whither? What, to see? To see? To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from the shore, of which the waters chafed and dashed the wild year through, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds, born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about it like the waves they skimmed. But even here 2 men who watched the light and made a fire, that through that loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea, joined their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, and wished each other a Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder too, with his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be struck up a hardly song, it was like a gale itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on, until being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted upon a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout on the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day, and with homeward hopes belonging to it. and every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had a kinder word for another on that day than they had on any other day in the year, and had shared to some extent in its festivities, and remembered those he cared for at great distance, and had known they delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind, and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths were as secret and profound as depth. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was as much a greater surprise to Scrooge to recognise it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, gleaming room, with the Spirits standing smiling by his side, and looking at the same nephew with approving affability. Now, I'm going to leave it there because this chapter is really long, so you'll have to have part 2 of it tomorrow. Then I'm going to stop Lentil from chewing his Auntie Maria's cardigan, which is apparently what he's doing at the moment. Lentil, no! That's Auntie Maria's. He's over there. You see what he sat on? That belongs to my sister, and I brought it home so I could do a little mend for her, because I crocheted for her many years ago, and I just caught Lentil chewing one of the sequins. Lentil! Santa, I'm going to tell Santa. I always put his ears back. He's like, please don't tell Santa. I'm very hot now, as you can tell by wearing a hat and a load of holly and a jumper inside my house. I'll catch you next time for part 4 of A Christmas Carol. Good night.